look at the facts round about climate change a little bit and see around carbon footprint. So that's basically the first part, and we will have some interactions that I put in to see if we can already warm up, and that's basically where I wanted to start with you. It's going to that link. I hope you can see that, and now I'm going to go to the application actually. And the idea now is that we all might type in some factors that we believe are the biggest carbon emitters. Yeah. So now the idea is that we can type, whether when it's from your phone or from the application which I showed you earlier. So when you add the link, you can actually now start typing in some words. I don't know if you're able to type. I am. So now when I type in something here on my phone, because I'm also at the same time with my phone on that link, I type in cows, yeah, and then see if that's true or not. Aha, it's working, cool. Agriculture, depletion, cows, land. Yes, it's working. I'm happy about that. So let me see if I can do something about this camera. So in the meantime, you can already see everybody can freely now put in some words that come to your mind. It's just a little brainstorming at the beginning. And okay, that seems to be working fine. Something in the, okay, you're saying industries, okay. Let's type that too. I'm going to put that for you. Should be there now. Industries. Yeah, that's what I meant. If you're not able to participate in the poll, just feel free to put it in the chat, and then we also can put it on the screen. I hope everybody can see it. Can everybody see the writing in on the screen now? Because before I had my PowerPoint shared. Now we should be able to see my browser. Just to make sure everybody can see the browser. No, you don't need to connect with the phone. For me, it was just another way for us to, because if you have the phone separate from your screen, it's easier to type maybe and then see at the same time what's going on here instead of going to another tab and then having to fill it out. That was just an idea. You don't have to use your phone, of course. Okay, we already see some interesting points everybody's putting. We see, for example, transportation. We see production, important point. Oh, something going on here in the chat. Okay, you can see the browser from the phone. Perfect. So everybody can see the browser. That's good. Okay. Yeah, we see production, depletion. I guess resources and the land or whatever you mean. Industries, cows. Don't know if that's carbon actually. Or if we talk about climate change, maybe cows play a role. Depends. When we talk about meat production, maybe then they do. That was my first point. But maybe we should be thinking: is it really carbon? What we're talking about here? Let's talk about land. Okay, food, electricity generation, agriculture. Okay. Yeah. First, thanks for the participating. Okay. Yeah, I think that's already. We already see that we have some important facts here already mentioned. So actually now let's then go a bit into detail when we talk about carbon footprint, because many people talk about it, and of course we first need to define what we really mean by that, and we just depict a little definition. And well, I'm a scientist, so we always come up with the definition first to make sure what we're talking about. Yeah, the carbon footprint is defined as the total greenhouse gas. Some of you already know, of course, what that is. Emissions caused directly and indirectly by an individual, organization, event, or product. So we see there's already a couple of different activities associated with carbon footprint. So it's not just maybe a company, it's not just a person. So we see it can also be a country. That's not mentioned here, but we can extend that definition to whatever defined space that we want to, basically. But this is a working definition. Basically, it is calculated by summing the emissions resulting from every stage of a product or service lifetime. It's also important that we have maybe a life cycle perspective, but not necessarily, because that would be not always necessary, because we want to have a footprint like a picture of now. but we refer to material production, manufacturing, use phase, and end-of-life disposal. So here we see, for example, waste. That could have been another point on the brainstorming slides, for example. Yeah, we saw transport, mobility, but we go into a bit of depth into some graphs and data where we see actually what is the data saying about the driving forces and about the biggest emitters, for example. Okay. So, okay, then we have a reference. Maybe we measure it in tons, but then we don't really know. If we don't know what is a good reference, then we can't really say if what I'm emitting, so to say, is good or not good. If there's no criteria that defines that, it's always a bit vague. So we need to, boil that down a little bit. So this means we need to say maybe what is the average, and what was the average, then maybe to stop climate change. If that's the objective. Because that's what we're also talking about. Obviously, this is in the whole context of climate change and global warming. So we have a global objective that it must not go beyond 2% increase. So there is already like the common knowledge that there is some increase, and we already will see in the slide that I have that there is already some increase over the last years or centuries, so to say. But there's this global target of not surpassing 2% or 2 degrees Celsius. So we can look at the data now. This was from a US side, so this is a bit more from the US perspective, but it doesn't matter because we also will see European data. In the US, for example, the average carbon footprint is 16 tons, so this gives us a little bit of a reference of CO2. One of the highest rates in the world, and we will later see a slide where we have the per capita, and then we also see the inequalities in who is emitting and who is not so much emitting. And we go into that a bit further. Globally, the average is 4 tons, so we see this is 4 times higher than the average worldwide. We already see this is some kind of inequality. But I don't want to go into depth into that because today we want to talk about management. So we want to focus on how can we manage our carbon footprint, and this is just an introduction because we will see at the end this can get pretty complex, and for that we have the experts also at our school, and my perspective is more the management perspective. So that's why we also not go into such deep analysis when it comes to math and analyzing complex scenarios, because this is introductory. But in general, what we need to see here, and this is the most important message, if we want to stop the 2% increase in temperature, then we need to target 2 tons on average. So this means a huge reduction for the industrial countries, and in the US, that's a big, big step, and that's why the challenge is there. Putting it into the European context, and maybe some of you have followed some of the older webinars we had on the Green Deal, and we will also have some upcoming webinars on the European Green Deal. Whoever is zooming in from Europe or knows a bit about the context, in December 2019, the EU Commission basically launched a green program called the Green Deal, and they want to invest 1.7 trillion euros into a green and circular economy, and 25% of that budget will go into climate action. And the target they have is basically to be the first continent worldwide to be climate neutral. So now we talk about another term, and that's carbon neutrality. So first we saw, okay, the footprint is what we leave basically on CO2 in the atmosphere. And now there's another term, we talk about carbon neutrality, and that's maybe also something you've already heard now in the news or read somewhere, and this is what the EU is basically targeting. They want to be a continent which is carbon neutral. I'm always questioning, is that enough? But this is another discussion. Let's first focus on what the Parliament says on carbon neutrality. So carbon neutrality means having a balance between emitting carbon and absorbing carbon from the atmosphere, and carbon sinks. So carbon can also be absorbed in different forms. So just the fact that we emit CO2 is not a bad thing. We just have to have enough potential to absorb everything we emit. So this is the ecosystem approach. Okay, removing carbon oxide from the atmosphere and then storing it is known as carbon sequestration. Trees, for example, or if you have good soil. That's why it's so important that agriculture has a main focus. And if you read the reports from the UN, you see that a big part of climate change is also contributed to the food and agriculture system. We had it in the beginning also on the slide, so we already know some about it. So improving soils, for example, is a very important thing when it comes to sequestration of carbon too. In order to achieve net zero emissions and worldwide greenhouse gas emissions will have to be counterbalanced by carbon sequestration. So we already see it. On the one hand, we have to reduce, obviously. So we can't just say, okay, let's keep emitting and then just try to sequester at the same time wisely. To have an easier zero would mean to reduce and sequester at the same time. That would be more efficient to tackle the problem from two sides. Okay, so just in the meantime, any questions so far? Am I going too fast or is this okay? Just quick feedback would be nice, so I know everybody can follow, or if you have questions. I hope it's not just all already common knowledge, but we already started with a little bit of basic stuff, of course. Okay, thanks for the feedback. Okay, yeah, some of the words were on the slides actually before. For example, transport. So now we see another chart. This is from Eurostat now. We see electricity. We had on the brainstorming slide in the beginning, we mentioned electricity, gas, steam, and air conditioning. Constructions, and that's maybe something not everybody has on their radar, so to say, because cement, for instance, is one of the biggest CO2 emitters, and obviously within the construction industry. And there's interesting alternatives. In one of the past webinars, we talked about hempcrete. Very interesting. It's actually a plant that can sequester CO2, so it has a negative carbon footprint. Another thing to think about: why should we only talk about carbon neutrality? Maybe we should think of being carbon negative. That's also to think about. Anyways, when we look at the data now, we see that the highest part in CO2 is due to electricity and energy, and then the second highest is construction, and then food beverage. So we have the agriculture and food industry basically here. So now we have already identified some hotspots, and we basically can see where to tackle. And this is not surprising now. Why the EU in the Green Deal, for example, has like 4 target areas, which is industry restructuring, where they want to introduce basically a circular economy to obviously also reduce waste. We see waste disposal has also to do with carbon footprint. Nothing is for free, so to say. So also, although we recycle, this will still create CO2 emissions most likely. And another area is mobility. Then we have housing, and energy. Those are the 4 main target areas when we talk about the Green Deal. And when we look at this chart, not surprising why. Yeah, a bit more detail about our facts and figures. We talk about greenhouse gas. We talk about also about the greenhouse gas protocol. A worldwide standard for measuring carbon footprint. We'll also go a bit in detail later on. And this is also what we in the expert course teach, all according to this protocol, because it's a worldwide standard. So this is also part of the introduction today. But we not only want to focus on the technical part, because carbon footprint management can also be done in a more not such sophisticated way, so to say. You can work with some basic rules, and by that already know you will reduce your carbon footprint, although you might not measure it completely. Although you say you can't manage what you can't measure, that's also something we will see later on. So we see on here, we have a couple of different gases. We don't have to go through all of them. We see, for example, the methane. That's actually what cows produce, those that I mentioned earlier. But we see also that different gases have different factors in how they contribute to climate change. And we see that the standardized unit is CO2. That's why we talk about CO2 footprint. We could also have talked about methane footprint, but that's not so convenient because basically all the calculations are based around the CO2 footprint as a reference. This is set as 1, and then all the others are basically to say how much more potential than CO2 does this specific gas have. For example, methane is 25 times stronger in contributing to greenhouse gas or to global warming potential. This is what GWP stands for. So we see that other gases, they could be even worse. When we see all these different kind of combinations, we see obviously this has some kind of chemical background. So those are associated with industrial processes. That's why we also talk about a greener and cleaner industry. That's why the EU, for instance, also has this big area of industry restructuring, because also the materials that we use matter. It's not just the blowing CO2 by energy production, so also the substances actually that we use, and then that create chemical reactions that then produce other gases, and we see that significantly much higher in many instances than just CO2. So we also have to think about these factors. So we have basically, we summarize quickly 10 different ones. I don't have to go through all of them. You can have the slides later on. You can see all of these things also with the reference here. Water actually also contributes, but this is nothing caused by the human. This is also part of the ecosystem. We need that, which later on this vapor can turn into rain, and that's what we actually need, of course. So, but this is a whole part of the ecosystem. We talk about CO2 because this is scientifically shown that the human cost factor is the CO2. So, and this accounts for 78% basically of those greenhouse gases. So that's why they say, okay, the human being is actually responsible for global warming. That's basically the argument, the chain argument. So we measure everything, and like I said, also in terms of global warming potential, we see that there's different potentials. Some are really much higher than just CO2. Okay, I think now for this everything is said so far. Okay, any questions so far, or is it okay if we continue? Okay, one question, sure. Of course. Do you need the microphone, or is it okay if you write the question in the chat? Okay. Okay. Okay, so no questions. Okay. Okay, so we continue. If I understood you correct, Fernando, it's okay for the moment? Okay, fine. Thanks. Just making sure. Okay, so we continue. This slide now shows us the average global temperature. We start in 1850, and we see for a long time it stays pretty stable, but now we see that it's going to increase a lot. If you want, we can also start over again, because it's really interesting how for a long time it starts. I mean, there's some change already, but we see it's pretty stable around a certain, we call it standard deviation in statistics. But then we see the interval gets bigger and bigger, and now we can see how it's dispersing. And this is from 2016. I mean, okay, but it already shows. And now we see again the target of 2% here, 2 degrees Celsius. So we see it's getting close. So that's why we have this global call to action, of course. Let's go a little bit more into some data. We talked about some. We see here basically the same phenomenon. In a chart, the data is taken from our Word in data, so you can get lots of information from there. And you see how basically, within the first phase of the Industrial Revolution, when they started having factories and started burning coals and all these things on a big scale to produce things that's when it's already started, the emission obviously of CO2, but now we can, this was maybe still handleable. We always talk about overcharging the ecosystem. How much can we sequester? Because we talked about earlier that it's not just a matter of how much do we emit, it's mostly a question also about how much can we absorb again in a natural way. Because we all know plants, basically they need CO2 to grow, to produce, to make photosynthesis and produce green matter, which can mean food, of course. So CO2 is not necessarily a bad thing. So we should not demonize CO2, but it's a matter of how much do we emit. And I mean, this chart is demonstrating it pretty clearly. Maybe we've gone a bit too far by emitting, and we can really see how in the last half of the 20th century, how it really exploded. And this has lots to do with the petrochemical industry. And this is also the time around when, for example, other things disappeared, like more natural products, like hemp, for instance. The 1920s around was a time of prohibition. And as I already explained earlier, the footprint to produce oils, for example, the first car made by Henry Ford was made by hemp plastic, something which is now a revolution. Porsche, for example, has just recently produced a race car, made from hemp plastic. You can make batteries from hemp and so on and so forth. So it's quite interesting how this one main crop was replaced by synthetic things, and the cotton was also replaced by hemp was replaced by cotton, and on the same time synthetic fibers were introduced, and how all this comes together, and we see how this whole plastic era in that we're living is also combined with the petrol industry. So when we talk about plastic, we talk about a huge carbon footprint, something that maybe we're not always aware about, but using plastic and plastic production is obviously oil-based, and oil-based is always associated with one of the highest footprints that we can imagine. And we see here clearly how history explains what's going on a bit at the moment, and why we should go back to other solutions that are already in the place. It's not that we have to reinvent the wheel again. Everything is there already for us to do what we have to do. But we also have to become aware first. We need to be able to measure, and then we can manage. Okay, here again, also interesting. Now we maybe have seen the absolute amounts, or we see, okay, which are the countries that emit the most, and we see that the US, China, and Australia are pretty high. Europe, from the color, I mean, it's still high, but it's not one of the highest. But still, we can pretty much see that it's also not fairly distributed. So that basically the in many cases the industrialized world, or that countries that then exported basically their factory, for example, to China, and they just exported their carbon footprint to those countries that also now are seen as a high footprint. But when we then look at another table here, we see that there's a huge inequality. That basically the high income countries, which only make 16% of the world population, count for almost 50% of the carbon footprint, and the low income or lower middle income countries, which make another half, only account for 13, or the low income countries only account for almost nothing. And there we see really who has to be responsible and take into responsibility. Not to say that others shouldn't care about the footprint, but obviously talking from a European perspective, we cannot expect others to solve the problem. We are now in the responsibility to take action. And from a business perspective or from an organizational point of view, we have a big leverage. So that's why we also talk about here footprint management. It's a bit more corporate or business point of view, which we can also talk about on an individual level, on a household level, on a country level. But today in this webinar, we talk more from a business perspective later on. Now again, basically confirming the chart we had earlier from Eurostat. Again, we see the biggest contribution here: electricity, transport, manufacturing and construction, then housing and residential. This could be also be put together, and then other sectors. But we really see where the most action is needed. Yeah, some more quick charts. We see other effects of global warming and climate change. For example, the ocean acidification, which is a big problem, because this affects then the plankton production, and that affects the whole food chain. Yeah. Another problem is the microplastics in the ocean, but this is something we don't talk about today. Although it has to do with carbon footprint too, but this would definitely be too much for one session. One thing, I don't know if one of you had the experience. Unfortunately, last summer, here we were living in the Canary Islands, and we were evacuated also because of the wildfires. And I mean, the whole world saw what was going on in the Amazon and Australia, and these kind of things, and droughts. Right now, also again here in the Canary Islands, we have a really dry winter. We had another huge desert storm, and we had no rain for almost the whole winter. So these kind of situations are becoming more common. And another way, what I talk about a lot is permaculture. We also teach permaculture, and I'm a certified permaculture designer. So this is one of my passions also. That's why we also decided to live on the countryside, but still be globally connected, so to say. But one thing I can already maybe spoil the end. One of the actions we can take is basically also going more rural and all, so to say, growing more food, make food production more local. That could be one thing, and storing energy in different ways. Something we talk about in permaculture a lot. Yeah, catching the rainwater or also recycling grey water allows us to have much more water. Yeah? So there's also systems in Laos, for example, where this grey wastewater, so to say, is then reused and cleaned in a wetland outside of a city, and then the water can be again used to water all kinds of plantations. So we don't have to become afraid about what is going on, but we need to really become aware and take action. So this is really not to scare anybody, but we need to just know what we're talking about. And that's why originally I had planned to watch a little video, which now I want to skip, because it might be a bit too hard to see all these scenarios of what could happen if the ice melted overnight. So this is like a really dramatic scenario, but legitimate, to see what is the extremist it could go to really see that that's something we need to prevent. Obviously, it's based on lots of assumptions, yet it shows in an illustrative way how everything is interconnected. So another call to action, and become more aware of why everything is connected. Since you have the slides later on, go to the website. You can also just Google Business Insider, if the ice melted, and you find instantly. It's a 5-minute little video. I like it, but it's maybe a bit tough, so that's why we're not going to watch it now. But for you to have it as a resource, I think it's a good thing. Hope is on the horizon, so to say. Another thing just recently published from the World Economic Forum. Personally, I'm always a bit skeptical also about these big websites and big corporations or institutional sites, but we can't neglect them either. I'm a fan of independent media, to be honest, but we need to also be obviously really afraid about fake news. So it's good to have official links too. We see here the World Economic Forum, and they say, okay, renewable energy is on the rise. So there's hope on the horizon, because when we talk about renewable energy, we talk about, when we talk about emissions, we talk about zero or small emissions. But if we talk about resource use, that's another thing. But CO2 emissions lowered. Surprisingly, in this scenario, there's still a big part of coal, although we talk about decarbonization projected until 2050. I've seen other predictions too, or projections, and when we talk about the EU, the EU alone, I'm sure they don't want to have this part here so big, because this is one of the highest or one of the main targets to decarbonize the economy. So we see, but maybe worldwide the energy mix won't sustain the energy demand by the given investment rate. So some scenarios are depending on lots of assumptions. But just say hope is on the horizon, or on the horizon. Renewables are on the rise, and we talk about Spain, for example. The the percentage of renewable energy, is really high at the moment. Almost one of the, fortunately, also because of some legislative changes. That's another story, something we can't influence. But there are things that we can manage. But first, for managing, we need to be able to measure certain things. This is a famous quote: "You can't measure what you can, or you can't manage what you can't measure." So this is why we have controlling systems. Yeah, this is why we have all these accounting. If you don't know how much you earn and how much you spend, you can't calculate a win or a loss. This is where basically this quote is coming from. The same thing now when we talk about a balanced footprint, we talk about accounting, so we talk about measuring. And this is a bit we talk now a bit about the more sophisticated approach, which we're not going to see in detail or not into depth. We will see some details, of course, of how to manage, how to measure carbon footprint from a corporate perspective. And then you will see from that measurement, we see already where can be the hotspots, and we can think about some ways to reduce it. This is basically the objective of the following things. Now, we don't have to form groups because it's not necessary. We're just a small group today. But again, let's go to the poll, and I have to clear the answers, of course, but we can use the same link again. And now think about, what do we need? This is now another brainstorming. We can all think, ask ourselves now, what do we need in variables and things that we have to collect to measure carbon footprint? Now, this is my question. So what do we need to have as variables? Or if thinking about, I'm a researcher and I have to write down everything I need to be able to measure carbon footprint. So now we can brainstorm on this poll. What factors do we have to consider? Okay, let's go and go to the sharing again. This is the old one. Let's see. Okay. So we can start it over again, so I don't have to produce another one, but it's okay. Now you can actually go back to the link that we had earlier, and as soon as you start typing in some factors that we need to measure a carbon footprint, they will appear here again. I hope you can see my screen again, and everything is working from the technical side. Let's see. I make the start. Just something which does not make so much sense. We need units, maybe. Does make sense, but doesn't help you maybe so much. But to give you an idea, what kind of things do we need to measure the carbon footprint? You can also write it in the chat, and I type it in for you, or you can write it again in the poll. I invite you to do both. Accurate. Interesting. Consumption. Registries. Okay. Let's think some more. Already good answers, but let's think of some more factors. Okay. Thinking about who, objects, subjects, so to say. Then we saw something earlier. For example, global warming potential, maybe something we need. Let's type in some more, just so we have them on the screen. Another word is quite important we talk about, and we will talk about now, is scope. Yeah, it's something we can already measure. Good word. Let's put it. We need a measure. How is something measured? in units. Let's say kilograms, tons, liters, whatever measure you use. Accuracy is an important word when we talk about then accounting. When we go, if we would go more into the depths today into the accounting, there are some accounting principles. Now you have accounting principles when it comes to a loss and loss and profit account balance. Then we also have certain accounting principles, and the same applies here too. There was something new. Discipline. What is it? Scope view. Okay. Okay, maybe we find some more. Transparency, good. Yeah, that's also one of the principles of accounting. There it is. Okay. There was something new. Consumption. Very important. I will also put something now, something called emission factor. Maybe you have heard about that. Can see it. Let's see. Yeah, emission factor. They all divide everything. Okay, so if you're fine, we can actually keep going back to the presentation. There's something new in the chat. Sorry, don't want to. Let's see. Okay, yeah, Mireia, no problem. Yeah, that's something we have no control over. Don't worry, you will have the recording. I will have to edit it a little bit, but then you get a link and you will have the recording and everything is fine. Okay, so take care and bye-bye to Ireland. Let's continue here in the presentation. Hope to see you next time. Venga, hasta la próxima. Okay, now I'm going back to my presentation. I'm a bit distracted, sorry. Okay. You should be able to see the slides again. Yes? Quick feedback. Do you see my slides again? Just to know that I can continue with the slides. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Okie dokie. Thank you. Okay, so now, so yeah, next slide. So what do we measure? So that's what we were talking about in the exercise now. We talk about CO2 emissions in a given time span. So another variable we could have put in this exercise earlier was period or time frame or whatever we want to call it. For process, product, organization, consumer, state, etc. So that's what we mean by objects or subjects or units or whatever we want to call it. And then we talk about a direct footprint and we talk about an indirect footprint. Two terms we have to distinguish. Yeah, just a quick, why should I actually care? I mean, we have seen now all these slides before, but also from a business perspective and the Greenhouse Protocol also they mentioned that we reduce corporate risks, also future regulations. We assume our responsibility. Consumers value it, employees care about it, investors are starting to look into it. It can reduce the costs. We have, for example, the Green Deal, the regulations will change, and the future should become decarbonized. And another thing where we can already be an early adapter or ahead of the game, vielleicht, maybe, so to say. Okay, we talked about scope. We talk about organizational limits, and that's really important to define because you don't want to measure the same footprint twice. Nowadays, we have also multinational corporations. We also have joint ventures. We have all kinds of different organizational forms, and it's not always so straightforward to define, and until which percentage I am responsible or I have control or what can I really influence. and what is really something accounting to me. So this is not always easy, and that's the tricky part basically of the footprint calculation, and where I personally hand it over also to my expert, Pedro, which is also the teacher in the course, the expert course. So he has the mindset for really the engineering view on everything, and he's the master on that. Like I said earlier, I'm more from a management perspective, but obviously I need to know the standards, but he's the really expert when it comes to like complex life cycle analysis and all these kind of things. Also something we will talk on a circular economy course and introduction course soon. And maybe you have come then too. So yeah, we define different scopes, and we will see. It depends also. Yeah, where do we analyze, and is it a shareholder view? So how many shares do I own, for example, in a company, and I'm responsible for that amount of shares, or how much control do I actually exercise over these shares? Maybe it's not necessarily the same. And then the financial view is another perspective. Just to give you a little bit of an example that it can be really complex to define these boundaries. Take, for example, group companies or subsidiaries. If we have the whole equity share, we own the whole emissions. But we also see cases if we're just affiliated, maybe we just are responsible for zero because they have to account them on the other side already, so we don't want to count them twice. And that's basically the main story. And then we have, for example, non-incorporated joint ventures. Then depending on the equity share, if it's just a fixed asset investment, we also see it's not accountable at all. And franchises again, depending on the equity share. So we see this is not always straightforward, and as we know, this can get pretty messy. And we see just in a very simple example that it's not so straightforward to see, okay, who emits what and what is accountable for what. And like I said, this is where we need to go more into depth, but this is not today the time. But we can see this is possible and this is necessary to define the organizational boundaries and the operational boundaries, and according to what applies to what, we are accountable for the CO2 or not. Why is it important to know if I'm accountable? Because it also depends on what can I measure and what can I manage, and so this really matters. Like I said, we need to distinguish between direct, indirect, and other indirect, so to say. So here we introduce the concept of scope. Direct emissions, we will see now in a graph more what that means, but direct emissions of CO2. Then we have indirect, which is, for example, the electricity that I have to purchase, which is indirect because I am not the producer of electricity, but I purchase it. So this is indirect. And then we have other indirect. For example, my employees are going by car to work. I can't necessarily directly influence that either. But they are part of my whole organizational footprint, because I also cannot neglect that they are at the end coming to my factory or to my office or whatever. So I am also co-responsible for them and how they commute around to the office, at least. So this graph or graphic shows it pretty nice. What is what, and we see how we can distinguish. Here we have the reporting company. So this is the point of view we have been talking about now. We talk about reporting, we talk about managing, and then you want to report on what you managed and what you measured, so to say. So we see here it falls into company vehicles or company facilities. And all this is scope 1. So this is the only 2 or 3 examples basically for scope 1. Then we have scope 2, which I earlier mentioned, purchasing of electricity, steam, heating, and cooling for own use. So for example, for the light in the factory or in the office. Then we have other purchased goods and services, capital goods, fuel, transportation, all these things we mentioned earlier, waste generation, business travel, employee commuting, what I just mentioned, and leased assets. This is scope 3, and but upstream. But then we have also more. Scope 3 is yeah, most of the, or many examples fall into scope 3. We see 1 and 2 are not so many cases, and most others are scope 3. Now, this is important to know who's responsible and what can I actually do about it. But in any case, it matters then later on for calculation. Yeah, here we have transportation and distribution. For example, of my goods and services. How do they get to the wholesaler, retailer, or end consumer in the end? Processing of sold products, also logistics, all the wrapping of paper and plastic to transport it on different pallets. All these things have a big footprint, and logistic industry is one of the industries which will be under big scrutiny in the next years, because e-commerce has really skyrocketed the transport footprint in the last years, and we never really think about it. Maybe what Amazon, apart from being really practical, has caused a footprint, or the phenomenon of everything comes to your doorstep, also means that everything at the last mile, they call it, has increased drastically. And all these things have to be taken into consideration when we talk about managing carbon footprint. We don't hear about it in concepts like smart cities. They really think about how can you put production more into the cities with, for example, 3D factories. And they really think about these kind of things, that many parts, for example, for cars, for instance, that are easily replaceable, they want to start producing them inside of the cities, for example. Okay, there's a question. Is there a set of rules? Well, the rule, this is basically, the rule is, do you cause it yourself, which is scope 1? Then category 2 is really just one case only, the purchasing of electricity. This is like the own category. They created this one category specifically just for that. So nothing else falls into scope 2. Well, it already makes it pretty easy. And then everything else is scope 3. So this is basically the rule. Either I produce it myself, I myself, for example, with breathing out CO2, is scope 1. Yeah, me going jogging, I breathe more, maybe that's scope 2, scope 1. But this is not necessarily important in the business setting, but just to illustrate, okay? Scope 2 is only purchase of electricity and or energy. That's it, and everything else is scope 3. Does it help a bit for explaining? Okay, thanks. Now we can practice a little bit. Good that you had the questions already. Let's go back to the poll. And now we have well, they call it competition. For me, it's just, we don't need to see it as a competition, but they call the plugin, so to say, a competition. So don't worry, this has nothing. Don't worry about it. Find the right scope. Yeah, and the application, as I said, is just called competition. But don't worry, you don't have to feel that we're competing here. So let's start presenting again. So you should see now, as soon as you put in the answers, we should see what's going on. I hope everybody is on the, okay, Khadija is not, so, but it doesn't matter. Let's just go through it and see if we can have some fun with this. So the first, purchase electricity, steam, heat, cooling for own use. You should be able to give some answers now, I think, on the poll. Let's see, there's a little timer, so we don't have so much time. I say it's scope 2. Let's see what everybody else says. 100% right, but I don't know if I'm the only one that just voted, but it doesn't matter. We can keep going through the presentation, and I just do it from here. No, Fernando, yay! Good job. You did it very quick, so that's why you have 1,000 points. Perfect answer, I would say. Nice. Okay, that's fun. Okay, let's keep going. Yeah, I'm glad we're testing out this new application. I'm really happy about that. Waste generated in operations. What might that be? We have again the time running. Okay, let's resolve. Not clicking. Okay. Okay. Somebody said scope 1. Somebody said scope 3. Okay. Let's keep going. It is actually scope 3 because it's waste generated falls into scope 3. It's not directly from me because the waste generated is more indirect process, so that's why it falls into the other category. Company vehicles. What scope might that be? Time is running again. I don't know if this time is still running. I don't see the timer this time. By my side, at least, there's no time on this side. Let's see. Scope 1. Yay, that's correct. Perfect. Good job, everybody. Fernando is leading the game, but it also because Khadija can't participate. She only is in the chat, but this is just for fun anyways. Use of sold goods. We had that on the slides earlier. Now time is running again. I know, Khadija, can you see everything? And I hope you're still having some fun seeing the answers, because I don't know if you can participate actually. Maybe you can give me quick feedback. Okay, let's resolve. Hope everybody can still hear me. Fernando, definitely. I don't know if Khadija is still there and can hear me. All right. I think all this user web, that's me because I'm not signed in. So all good. But because I actually don't know. No, maybe it's also Khadija. I don't know. I hope she can still hear me. But yeah. The way employees commuting, traveling, driving to work, etc. We go again. Okay, now I see my timer again. Good. Okay, let's resolve again. Oh, I think I didn't vote this time. Oh no. Oh no, I did. Okay, let's resolve. Okie dokie, yeah, scope 3 is correct. Yeah, I mean, it becomes a bit repetitive because, like I said, most of the cases that we can think of may fall into that category. Still good to know. Yes, Fernando leading the game. Good job. Okay, contractor-owned vehicles. I think that might be the last question. But anyways, let's do it. Next question. Okay, let's resolve. Okay, again, scope 3. All right. Yay, that's the end. We all won. Great job. Okay, so now we can go back to the presentation. This was just a little bit exercise to memorize a bit. Basically, what's the essence. So now we go a bit more into detail when it comes to how to proceed when we want to measure. Earlier we were talking about it. We had the brainstorming about what is necessary to actually start measuring. So what factors, what parts do I need to collect? What data do I need to collect? So we need to decide whether we look on the department, the business unit, the factory, the whole organization, and so on. Very important, the source of emission. So who emits in the end, or what? So basically the main step in the beginning to make a list of all things that we want to include in the calculation. So we have to think of processes, think of what's going on in your business and all the situations. You want to define first a certain specific area and then broaden it to not get lost in complexity. We need to see whether it's a fixed or mobile combustion. We need to have we need to know about the process of emissions. We need to know about leaks, calculation method, the emission factor, something I put earlier in the brainstorming, and the source of measurement. And then in the end, start collecting data. So here a little example. Thanks to my colleague Pedro, this is already really illustrative. So I just took a bit of our materials from the course, and we can have a little bit insight on what we would do more in depth in the online course actually. But here we already can have a glimpse on what we need to do or how we approach it. We always work with Excel, so we will see we will have a little Excel sheet, and from that we can already have a little exercise there. Here, let me read the exercise. The store has a van. We see already it's pretty limited, with which it has made 15,000 kilometers last year. It spent 825 liters on gasoline during that year. So we have 1 year. It consumed 38,000 kilowatt of electricity, kilowatt hours, and its boiler consumed 17,000 kilowatt years of natural gas. Then we have employees. We saw it's within my scope 3. So your employees come to work, each in your car, assuming for each the following kilometers, or in their car, basically, I should say. Lucia, she drives in the whole year, she drove 3,000. Juan, 1,500. So we see the example is made in Spain, but it's okay. We have Maria, and 2,700 kilometers, and we Jorge with 6,000 kilometers. So now, on top of that, we have an air conditioner, also pretty common in the summer. Depending on where you live in Spain, it's pretty impossible to live without one. Yeah, I once lived in Andalusia, in Jaén. That was the hottest I've ever been, and now where we're living, also Gran Canaria, in this valley, in the specific area, can get really hot, especially when we have desert winds. So unfortunately, sometimes you can't be without air conditioning unless you have ways to improve the building. It's something we'll talk about later. So the question is now, what's the store's carbon footprint? How much of scope 1, 2, and 3? We don't go into that detail, but more importantly, what is the carbon footprint? Where we also see the different scopes here. So another thing that we need, and this is something we can see in the database from the IPCC, no? International Planet on Climate Change. This is a huge database. Actually, you can get lost a little bit, so that's why I recommend taking the course, for instance, because you need to learn how to read the database to extract these factors, to then be able to calculate the footprint if you want to do that, and if you want to report the footprint and not spend thousands of euros every year to hire consultant companies to do it for you. You might want to empower yourself by learning it, or one of your employees, and then you have it in-house calculated and also factored in the cost in a different way. So this is a complex exercise, but for this example, we simplified, of course. Here we have these emission factors, because we need to know in the end, and this is the formula, emissions equals the activity data. So how much do I consume, for example, electricity? But this doesn't say me anything about CO2. Electricity is measured in kilowatt years, but I want to know how much CO2 I produce. So I need to have some kind of ratio that calculates then how much 1 kilowatt year means in tons or kilograms in CO2. And this is actually exactly what this is showing. We see these different emission factors, and those you have to extract, as I said, from this database if you want to use this methodology of the greenhouse gas protocol. There's different ones, but we will talk about this. Okay. We see different ones. We see also there's different ones between the different cars, which makes lots of sense, because it's a huge difference if you drive an old timer, or if you have a newer car, or if you have diesel, or if you're an electric or hybrid or electricity car. All these kind of things matters. So see, we have different factors here, and we already see that the refrigerator has a huge heating potential. We will later see also why. Let me resolve. Now in this chart, we see how it's done. You should always list the different activities according to the scope. So we start with the scope 1 activities, everything that I'm responsible for. Okay, we see here everything that I do from my building. So this is the company, the heater, and the air conditioning. But then we see scope 2, buying, purchasing of electricity is always scope 2. And then we have the other indirect emissions caused by our employees, and car 1, 2, 3, and 4 of our different 4 employees. Important, the type of fuel, then the value. We have had that earlier in the exercise. We had to buy 825 liters of gas. the heater consumes such and such, and so on. So all these data we write down in an Excel sheet, or you have maybe more sophisticated data base, but this works fine. And then we have the different units. We already wrote that earlier in the exercise. And then something important here, which I mentioned, the emission factor. And there we already see the differences between the different activities. And then, like I said from the formula earlier, we have to multiply the amount of what we spend then with the emission factor to then get to the amount of CO2 emissions. And then we can sum that up and then get to a total equivalent of CO2 tons. Okay, so this is basically what you have to do. And now we have a little exercise, and this we can just do here with the chat and with Fernando. I don't know if Khadija is still hearing. I hope so, but I don't get any feedback. So now we have the exercise, and we can put just in the chat. Feel free to suggest improvements for this company and give ideas how this could become even carbon neutral, something we also talked about earlier. So take your time. Now we have a little bit of thinking time. What can we do to now improve the footprint without necessarily knowing like specific measures or amounts, but just by general rules of how we can be more sustainable, how we could now manage this footprint in a better way? Now, this is my question and something to now think about a little bit. The question was, what improvements can you suggest now to improve this footprint? Because, okay, one thing now is measuring, but if I'm not able then to do anything, let me turn my camera on, anything with that knowledge, then it's also not so useful. So now the basic question is, that's why I wanted to give you now time to think, as a little exercise, and take your time. What improvements could you suggest now to improve this company's footprint? This is basically now the main question. What can I do to improve this situation? And how can I even become carbon neutral? Maybe with some ideas we can already improve this company situation. So now this is a question for you, and I give you like 5 minutes time or so, whatever you need, and then we communicate again via the chat and see what ideas you had. Okay, first suggestion already from Khadija. You would suggest to change to renewable energy and to control the air conditioning, or to make use, or to control the air conditioning in a better way. Yeah, that's a high factor. Quite interesting, but not surprisingly actually. And that's actually known for a long time already. I mean, I remember when I was a little boy, a little boy, maybe 20 something years ago, I was a little boy, but I was still younger, and I remember my parents always talking about these things. Already in Germany, somehow we had things looking, for example, at the US. We couldn't understand how every house had to have air conditioning. I mean, of course, in Germany, you don't need air conditioning so much. But after living in Spain and living in these hot places, I understand that living without cooling can be quite heavy, but it doesn't need to be on this bad terms. There's much better ways to cool. Yeah. That what Fernando says is quite right. So they had to also exchange the heater. That was in the example, I think. This we talked about leaks. So that could have an influence here because they had to change it out. But in any ways, this doesn't have to be so high. But in general, air conditioning, also when you do it just on electricity, I remember that one of the air conditioner we had, for example, in the bedroom, had 3,000 watt, and if you use that per month, that creates first a really high electricity bill, and obviously because you use a lot of electricity, so the footprint can be significantly high. Okay, yeah. So let me give us some more ideas of what we can do actually. Yeah, we look at these and we identify some hotspots, and we had one of the ideas was obviously to switch to renewable energy. When you look at the tables, the emission factor is set to 0, but for me that's something we shouldn't be misled. Um, renewable energy is not the whole solution, and we also have to reduce our energy needs. Yeah? Um, it's not just a matter of let's put our windmills everywhere and just use wind energy, because it has also other problems. Again, when you think about the blades of the windmills, there's huge landfills full of those blades because they can't be really recycled. So we have to be really thinking about what is the future of wind energy, because we can't just substitute one problem with the next one. The next thing is solar panels. They're also associated with certain rare minerals and sands and things like that. So we also have to think about that, unto which point can we be using solar panels everywhere, and so on and so forth. So nevertheless, definitely it's the way to go to renewable energies. Not necessarily the way how we do things right now is good enough, but that's where innovation is born. There's many ways that we can innovate on solar energy, but that's definitely one way to go. So one thing is for us to switch to renewable energies. We don't have to necessarily be the producer, but if you want to be self-sufficient, that's optimal. And it's also, let's say, more resilient from an economic point of view. Small scale production on a broader scale is less crisis, let's say subtle, or less prone to crisis and shortages. But obviously you need a big grid. But putting everything into a monopoly, which then produces our electricity, can also not be the solution. So self-production is also after a while cheaper. Yeah, you can, if electricity is high and its prices will still rise, you can really yeah, like amortize the investment, yeah, pay off in a short time, 5 to 10 years maybe, or less, to pay off the thing. So it's worth thinking about it if you have the opportunities. If you have your own building, definitely a way to go, apart from other things you can do. You can also think about then the company car. We see this has a high footprint for these kind of things. Electric cars are a solution, but again, not the only solution, because the batteries are still a problem. But I also mentioned it earlier. We had the chance lately to listen to an expert from the US about hemp, and we also talked about hemp batteries. It's really crazy that you can do batteries now based on a plant, and this would resolve the whole problem with batteries, for example, because electric cars, they still have the problem with the batteries that then have to be disposed, and we saw the disposal, apart from maybe releasing toxic substances, they still create a CO2 footprint on top. So yeah, the whole picture is not as straightforward always. So the next thing could be to improve the energy efficiency of the building, because we just saw the heating and cooling and all these things have a huge problem with it associated. And yeah, there's many techniques. So I'm just putting one example of passive houses or different designs. Yeah, I mentioned permaculture earlier. This is for me the most inspiring design system to really naturally cool houses, which means you plant trees in areas where the sun is coming from, and you create shade where you want to have shade and things like that. Obviously, this is not possible everywhere. You can't apply this mindset of trees, for example, everywhere. But there's also the idea of green walls. They cool down a lot. So there's many innovation going on in that respect. So energy efficiency is also worth thinking about. Insulating and things like that make huge impact. So then the next point here is the mobility of your employees. And you might think, okay, what kind of influence do I have over my employees when it comes to what can I tell them how to come to my company? You might think that is out of your competency maybe to judge over that, but we saw it's kind of your responsibility too, because you are actually providing them the way of financing their way of living or their life. And so you share some responsibility. That's why we talk about corporate social responsibility. As an entrepreneur, you're responsible also for the well-being of your employees, apart from being responsible for their CO2 footprint. Maybe in a way, and that's why we talk about indirect CO2. But we see that they also create some impact compared to the others. Factors is maybe not as high, but still high enough to think about it. And when we want to think about being carbon neutral, then we have to do something about it. No? Yeah, there's ideas about carpooling, but there's also the idea to give maybe incentives to use public transport. I see lots of companies, or lots of not, but there are lots of companies still that pay for the monthly transport ticket, which for me is a great way to say, hey, if you don't want to use your car, I reward you by giving you a job ticket, so to say. Yeah, and in some countries it's even co-financed by the government and things like that. It's worth thinking about, and if it's not there yet, it's always worth starting an initiative to start it. Yeah, or the carpooling, for me it's a great idea, and funnily it's not so spread out as it could have been. I remember using carpooling 15 years ago, and it's a great way if you're living in a city and you don't need to have a car necessarily every day. Just use carpooling, and when you need a car for something to transport, because obviously for some things we need a car, mostly, yeah, but you don't have to own a car. Same could also be the company, and if we collaborate more in a different way, we could also think of carpooling on a corporate level. Yeah, what speaks against that industrial areas they start, if it's possible in a way, to start pooling more? The same with the employees. Why can't they pool also inter-organizational? Yeah, if they see, hey, in the neighbor company, maybe there's someone that comes from my same neighborhood. We have more or less the same schedule. Why can't we go to work together, although we don't work in the same company? So there's many ways also to be creative about it. That's what I meant earlier. We don't need to measure everything 100%, how much impact we have, but we know switching to certain alternatives will definitely reduce. And then we can, if you want to, also calculate a bit more. But we don't want to be too much about math today, about too much about calculations. Now I wanted to show you another great example of a sustainable company in the first hand, because now I want to focus more on what can we do from a management point of view, and looking at bigger companies or medium-sized companies, also production companies. Then we see that there's maybe a global value chain and production chain associated with it. Especially the textile industry lately has been under scrutiny too. They say that it's increasing the footprint a lot, and especially the phenomenon of fast fashion, like these chains. I don't want to name any brands here, that then create fashion all the time, and this creates a huge impact in many ways. And I mean, you just have to look at some rivers in China, how they look like, and it's really crazy, apart from the CO2 that is emitted. So we see managing CO2 from different sources and from where I can improve is becoming a complex situation, maybe. And I mentioned this company because they're also within the common good economy movement, so to say. It's a certification system too, so this is a certified company in terms of sustainability. They also have the global reporting certification, so they are already showing in many ways what they do to be more sustainable. And one required indicator of these sustainability reports. So now we're going into the communication area of sustainability, because it's fine if you do everything perfect, but if no one knows about it, then it also doesn't create any kind of advantage or benefit for you in terms of talking to your customers. Yeah. So this is another part of management of CO2 footprint, and also something we will talk about in the expert course. Important part of management is communication. So we have to talk about, and this company has many resources to show what they do basically on the area of carbon footprint management. And let me show you actually their website. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to their homepage, and we see that they have a really detailed overview on carbon footprint, and we already will see some things we just had earlier in the presentation. The upstream and downstream picture we had earlier, they actually have it on the website too, and yeah, here we see it. So they are aware about what they have to do, upstream and downstream activities, and that's also how they categorize here their reporting. Obviously, so this makes sense. We see that's why we have standards, so we can compare. So now we see this footprint of the company called VAUDE, this outdoor clothing company from Germany, and they prepare their data in a way that an international community can understand and read what they do. We could download the climate balance if we want to, but it's just one Excel sheet with lots of data, so it's not so illustrative now for our purposes. But they also mention all these things that we just mentioned earlier. We want to decouple our emissions from our corporate success, which means they want to become carbon neutral, but still be economically viable. So their economic activity has to be decarbonized, basically, and that's what they're trying to do. And how do they, for example, approach it, and what variables do they measure? Yeah, they see, okay, emissions per employee or emissions per ton of production output. So we saw earlier we had calculation for this little shop, but they want to manage it from a different point of view. They say, okay, our indicators for us to see how well we are doing are measured by emissions per employee, and they want to keep reducing these things. Yeah. So they see, okay, over the time they are decreasing, so they are implementing different measures to improve. So obviously, one thing is switching to renewable energies, and here they have it also interestingly set up. So if you want to know more, they say, okay, a certain amount of our emissions are due to business travel or to commuting, something we mentioned earlier. Production materials, we see this is obviously the biggest part. If you're a production company, it makes perfectly sense that the biggest part of your footprint is due to production. But still, a high part, significant, is still due to commuting and business travel. So they also then have internal policies which just have clear rules on how to commute, and that's already something from a management point of view you can simply do, and it already improves your footprint without necessarily having to measure it. It's having a simple set of rules. For example, if you have a business meeting and you think, first question, okay, you need to meet. Do you need to meet physically? Yes or no? That could be the first question. If your question is yes, okay. If you can't be doing it virtually, because many things can be done nowadays also virtually, so this is another way to easily reduce the footprint also by home office and so on. But first question could be, okay, do I need to travel? Yes. Then, do I need to fly? Yes or no? Can it be done by train? Yes or no? How many kilometers? And so on. So you can have a certain set of rules to say, okay, if it's within 1 kilometer, you have to use the bicycle. Or if it's reachable within 3 hours of time with a train, then you have to use the train. If it's not reachable without a reasonable amount of time, then flying is okay. But if you have to fly, compensate. So you can use certain programs. You have to also be careful maybe which one you choose. I like the one which is called Atmosphere. Another way, which I haven't had on the slide earlier, how can you compensate the CO2 footprint of a company? Paying in a compensation program, and you find in a way from a balance point of view, but still doesn't change the status quo. And that's also a bit of the problem with the Green Deal. They will create this fund about trading of CO2 certificates, and in the end, this will allow people that have lots of money and big industry and that are already polluting. If they have money, they can still buy lots of certificates to keep polluting, and they are still the biggest polluters, so nothing can change maybe in the end. So compensation is just, let's say, the first and weakest thing we can do, but still good, especially when you have to fly. Compensation is really a good choice. Here they also have commuting. They give premium or rewards for employees that come by bike to work. Why not? They can also have a little bit competitions going on. Who is the greenest employee? By that, creating incentives. Already contributing in a mindset on your employees to reduce your footprint, and by that already for sure reducing it by already just doing that, because there will be people that say, okay, I will use the car less, or they premium in a way people that carpool. you can find ways to reward that. It doesn't necessarily have to be money wise. You can give them different benefits on the job, or if you're producing, you can think of merchandise or many things to somehow reward your greenest employee. So, and then they obviously have the biggest part in production materials. So also what they do, they say, okay, we have to manage over the whole value chain. We can't just say, okay, only what I'm doing here in Germany is affecting my balance. So they say, okay, my whole value chain has to be observed. So they go to the suppliers, they find ways in stewardship programs on how to reduce emissions where it's possible. They are installing energy, solar energy panels and things like that. This is taking up more responsibility than they are legally obliged to, and then we are talking about corporate social responsibility, and that's why I present this company, because they are even more than that. They are a common good company, certified, audited, and in many ways they show how they become on and how they are greener. Yeah? Also the building, the new company headquarter we should see here. When they acquired that, they had internally discussions also with the employees, and they were thinking about, okay, we need to grow the building, we need a bigger building. That's a fact. So what do we do? Do we build a new one, or do we restaurate, rehabilitate an older one? So they decided to actually renovate an existing building, which makes perfectly sense. And me, from a permaculture perspective, makes me happy, because one of the main rules in permaculture is make use of what you have, use and value the resources that you have. And they say, okay, there is already a building, no more new materials, so many have to be wasted, and the environment doesn't have to be more destroyed by building more buildings and by that destroying more land. So we renovate an existing building, and that's our headquarter. And then they also used eco-friendly materials and so on. So there's also the part tackled from the energy efficiency point of view. So they applied lots of insulating to already improve cooling and heating, because as we know, in Germany, it can be in the south, it can be hot in the summer, but really cold in the winter. I mean, not extremely hot in the summer, but still hot enough to make you wanting to have an air conditioning when you sit at the window and the sun shines in your face. And in the winter, it can be really cold. So you also need to do something about that, because both activities can create a high footprint. And they claiming that in overall they are trying to become climate neutral. So that's also their objective. Here you can actually read more. At least the headquarter is already climate neutral. We saw obviously they are not, because the whole process is not. We saw that there's still emissions, they're going down, but because they're also calculating the whole value chain. But just thinking about their own headquarter, where they directly have an effect on what's going on. We talked about scope 1. What can I do from where I am already? And at least there, which is already a big thing, they're climate neutral. So I can say heads up, that's a good thing. And then if you want to know more about that, go check it out. They're also certified, because it's one way is saying that you're doing it, another way is having a third party coming and actually verifying what you're doing and making sure it's true. And you can read up some more information about this company here on VAUDE. This is the company name, and this is the CSR report. The CEO, she's really passionate about it, and they're really active, and they have been certified in many ways. Another thing that they have on their website, something also we have on our website, but a different supplier. Our supplier is Green Web Space, and they are from Austria, also a common good company. Because one thing we might not have in mind yet, that one of the dirtiest industries projected by 2050 is the internet. We might not be aware about that every email we send creates a footprint. So back in the days, almost, retro, it's almost old school to put underneath your email, please don't print the email. That's already almost a given. But the newest way should be, please think about it. If you answer my email, if it's not necessary, please don't answer my email, because every email creates a footprint. And I've seen that in some articles already, and I think it's pretty funny that you don't think about that. But worldwide, how many emails, how many messages, how many WhatsApps, how many movies, YouTube, etc. All that is data that creates footprint because it's on servers that need space, that need cooling, that need electricity. So we might not be aware of it, but it's really big. We had a slide earlier from the World Economic Forum, and last year and around Christmas, everybody's having holidays and maybe watching Netflix. Not everybody, I don't watch Netflix, but anyways, so they had an analysis of Netflix worldwide. It's a worldwide website, and they said the whole website, just one website, had a footprint as high as Spain in 1 year. For me, that was shocking. Yeah, how can it be that one website creates so much CO2 from all the movies that are streamed, like a whole country with all the production costs, buildings, and everything? But worldwide, we're talking, and yeah, again, stressing out the importance of renewable energy, good heating systems, and cooling systems to reduce that amount. So again, we see, okay, many things I can control, but now thinking about the internet, all these clouds and extra services that I'm contracting, this picture gets quite messy. That's why we, for example, on our website, we also decided to go green with our website. It's also certified, and we chose that company not just because it's a common good company, but also because they plant trees according to the amount of traffic generated on your website. So it's not just a one-time certification, it's dynamic. The more you grow, the more you have to invest in climate. And I think it's a great thing because it goes way beyond the own scope. They want to have also the whole scope 3 included. And yeah, that's really great. And you can be already looking forward to it. We will have a webinar with them coming up, and we will hear about their approach and why did they start doing that, what was the inspiration, and I'm already looking forward to it myself. So stay tuned also for that. It will be really interesting, I think. Okay, I think with that said, we can yeah, go back to the presentation and and already start closing a bit because yeah, we're already way forward in time. We're still not over yet, but we also don't have to use the whole 2 hours that were scheduled. We had seen this one, we have seen this one. Just to have a simple approach, maybe it's nothing new. There's many other ways, but for those that now ask themselves, what can I do now today to improve my carbon footprint, and not necessarily from a corporate perspective. Now I'm talking about us, me as a single person, or as a household, or whatever, as a consumer. What can I do? And yeah, Khadija said it earlier too. And now we can already also in the chat we can drop ideas. I just put 5 simple ways. Now we're open free in the chat to put many more ideas and mention and brainstorm. But easy, we said switch to renewable energy. Here in Spain, luckily, it's almost as easy as one phone call, and you can switch from your old company to a new company. And because what many times happens is the electricity markets were privatized, and many people just stay with the old, this big monopoly, and they don't even know that it's possible that everything is liberal and regulated in a way, at least here in Europe, and that they have a right to switch their electricity company, and many people just don't exercise it for many reasons. And it's here, at least now in Spain, it's as easy as to grab the phone, make a phone call, and say, "Hey, I want to switch," and you don't even have to deal with your old company. You just call the new one, and they do all the paperwork for you, and you enjoy green electricity and don't feel so bad if you have to put on the air conditioner because you know at least you're carbon neutral. Yeah, so that's already also making you feel better maybe about yourself. For me, it made a huge difference knowing that now I'm using green electricity, at least here in Spain. And when I was living back in Germany, more than 10 years ago, it was already easy. But markets are different, and for me, at least, also knowing how everything works in Spain wasn't so straightforward at the beginning. Now I'm really happy lately that everything is fine, and we can use also green electricity. That's an easy way and makes you feel better, and you contribute to the solution. Next thing, really important, not as easy always, reduce the amount of plastic. And we saw plastic is terribly responsible for lots of CO2, and it contributes to many other problems apart from staying in the world. Never really decomposes. It just breaks down, becomes smaller and smaller, but it never really disappears. And sadly, already in the microplankton, we see microplastics, so which means the food chain is already in our blood, and so on and so forth. But that's just one side. if you look at the supermarket, go to the supermarket and it's just plastic. You go shop somewhere, it's just plastic, closed synthetic plastic. So there's even a comedy documentary, more or less. It's called Plastic Planet. It's shocking the amount of plastics we own, use, and don't use, and what kind of things we get plastic for. And obviously, this is one of the hot topics. We talk also about bioplastics, but we also have to maybe rethink the way we shop. Yeah, maybe the supermarket is not the solution, although maybe they want to tell us, okay, keep living your life, don't change anything, we just find the solution with technology. I don't think it's that easy. We need to have lifestyle changes too, and that's maybe not always easy to hear, or maybe not the nicest thing to hear. But think about two different scenarios. Yeah, you can either go to a supermarket, big chain, and everything is packed. Mostly even the fruits and vegetables that don't need packaging because they have a natural peel that conserves them perfectly. They are packed, standardized, and so on and so forth. So now they say, we don't have single-use plastic bags anymore, but still you shop and the whole plastic trash is filling up. What can be done? Go to local farmer, buy there, and instead of carrying tens of packages and unnecessarily stuff around your food, you get the real food and you don't get it processed. You have to do something about it. So that's one solution, but that's a main question about a lifestyle change in that respect. Shop, but also single-use plastic. Yeah, think about toothbrushes. Yeah, it's really crazy that they never decompose. Yeah, they just stay how they are, and that's how it is. And nowadays, many alternatives. Bamboo. Just be careful that you get the right ones with when the fiber for brushing. Yeah, it's not made from plastic, so that they don't sell you the wrong thing, because they sell now bamboo toothbrushes where just the stick is out of bamboo, but the other part is of plastic. Well, make sure you make activated carbon fibers. Yeah, that's really important. Otherwise, it's again a problem. Shop locally and support regional economics. Again, solving many problems maybe at the same time, because globalization is great. Being globally connected is great, but it also creates lots of footprint in many respects. We talked about the footprint of the last mile in e-commerce earlier. Um, that's just one side of the story. Transporting goods over the whole ocean in big boats that run on diesel oil are so polluting, and we have to really think about, is the consumption level so high, so necessary? That's another question. And then does it have to become coming from all the other side of the world? And by creating local economies, we also provide incomes for local families and not for multinationals. We reduce foot miles or transportation miles, and maybe even waste. In many cases, it's just great. And if you find local product solutions, you're helping local economy, and you're really making a difference also with what you're buying. So just another way to feel good about yourself when you shop, for example. Yeah, we had talked about it. Change the way you commute. It's not always that easy, that straightforward, depending on where you live. Cars are necessary, or the landscape doesn't allow easy bike riding. But again, we have cool solutions, and maybe being innovative, talking to your neighbors, or just thinking about partly improving. Maybe you can drive to a next park and ride, and then from there you take public transport, but you don't go the whole way by car. Or another really important thing, don't drive, if you're not living in the city, don't drive your car into the city. There's already enough cars into the city. Park your car outside. From there, take a bike, take an e-scooter, take whatever. That could be done. It's possible. Again, when you need to transport something, fine, maybe you have to drive your car, but is it necessary every time? It's just thinking about how we do things and improving in many ways. Okay, and then last but not least, don't buy fast fashion. Think about, if you need to buy something, do you really need it? Okay, when you really think, do you need it? Can you get it secondhand? Yes or no? Another chain of decision rules that we can set for ourselves. Yes or no? Do I need it? Yes or no? Do I need it firsthand? Yes or no? Some things you really need firsthand. Some things you don't necessarily need firsthand. And then, can you get it secondhand? Yes or no? It's also not always said. But then, if not, okay, buy it firsthand. Another set of rules: can you get it locally, ecologically, and circularly produced? things we can do, knowing that this will reduce our footprint for sure, although we maybe not measure the tons or kilos reduced by it, but we know for sure that it's better. Yeah, like I said earlier, feel free now, everybody, to drop some more ideas in the chat. This is just 5 ideas, but we can just spend the whole night now talking about ways to reduce our footprint. But nevertheless, I would like to get more ideas, and here we can exchange some thoughts. Let's just all, if you want, feel free now to write some ideas about how to reduce in a simple way your footprint, and you can put some ideas in the chat if you like. Okay, don't be too shy. Everybody, no mistakes are done by just putting ideas. Okay, Fernando writing. I think making a breakdown of our own consumption is a good start. That way we become more conscious on what we are consuming. Yeah, okay, good idea. Yeah, actually, by just listing different things, how we had it earlier, also by just thinking about what activities do I have during a normal day. Where do I go? What do I do? What do I eat? Just think about it, and but don't get crazy about it. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I've been trying to do that for many years now, and sometimes you go to a point that becomes maybe frustrating, maybe because not all the options are always there that you want, and then from being maybe a single student to becoming a family father with all of a sudden 4 persons that have to commute is also a complete different situation. And I also had to adapt a lot in that respect and be more permissive in certain areas, but not always feeling good about it. Yeah. Now the answer: switch to more vegetable diets, because meat industry is also a big CO2 emitter. Definitely, that's very good, very important. What Khadija says. We talked about agriculture, food, reducing meat. When you see different tables, red meat, cows is the worst, and then I think pork, chickens are not are also CO2 emitters. Fish, from that perspective, is also less, depending how it is done. Yeah, from my own perspective, it's a good rule. Personally, thinking about a small scale farming, uh, from a permaculture perspective, I don't have any problem at the moment, like thinking about eating chickens, because it makes a huge difference if you get chickens in a farm, a factory, where there's so many and they create lots of problems, and there's too much production. Or if you have your own little farm surrounded by trees that can sequester all the CO2 from that chicken. I mean, you have to also, it depends on the ecosystem where the animals are living. If you use them in forestry gardening, or forestry, agroforestry, they call it, combine forests with fruits and animals, and that way you create a closed loop and beneficial symbiosis, they call it. And so that's, for me, it's a good rule to say no meat, but it really depends on the way how much meat and how we eat it, or if we maybe can even locally from a farmer that I know it's ecological, that has a small scale, and we don't have to eat meat every day. That's reducing, and more vegetables is definitely also healthier. So definitely is a valid point. But now saying let's go vegan, everybody, it's also a call to action I don't 100% agree with, because soy production can also be on monocrops, and you see there's lots of GMO soy products. So just going vegan by not being ecological and regenerative is also not the way to go, just like that easy. That's just, again, my personal perspective. Yeah, thanks for your contributions. That's really cool. Now, just a little bit at the end of this introduction, and that maybe you've seen it also in Eventbrite. Some of you got the coupons. I invite you again to check out the course. We're going to start in 2 weeks around. there's still time to enroll. If you have any questions about the course, let me know. We can talk about everything. We make an appointment. We can have a phone call, Zoom call, whatever. Just let me know, and we talk about details. Feel free. What do we do in this course? Basically, keep doing this analysis much deeper. Yeah, we will go into more depth when it comes to what data is necessary, but we go really into the footprint of a product, of a organization, to really see to all extents of the complexity that we have to consider. We talked about the scope, we talked about the ownership, we talked about accounting principles. So we're going to know how to measure, account, communicate, and improve the footprint. And this is going to be in 10 weeks intensive work. We're going to have video lectures with the basics, and we're going to have every 2 weeks we have live tutorials like this. And as I said, together with my expert Pedro, he is really good when it comes to footprint and life cycle analysis, and he's also a sustainability consultant and teaches at the University of Valencia about footprint. So he really knows what he's talking about. So together we were doing this course. So feel free to have a look at it, and maybe if you know someone that's interested in that, or for your company or for other employees, it's a great way to improve knowledge on this really important matter. And yeah, quick announcement and invitations for you before we close. Feel free to sign up to our newsletter, because like I mentioned, we will have a webinar going on the green web hosting. We're going to have a guest. It's going to be a different setup. It's not going to be such a class. It's more like a little, let's call it talk show, but at the same time educational. We will have a guest that can present their case, and for me it's really interesting always to see how they present their company and what they're doing actually. So we learn from real practice cases, and we always see interesting characters, interesting persons also that tell their story. For me, that's also from an entrepreneurial point of view. I love it to hear other business owners talk about how they did it, and what made them go into sustainability. And yeah, we will have a couple of webinars coming up. Every month we will have a different topic. We will have topics circular economy. We will have a course also on that. We will talk more a bit about hemp. We'll talk more about the economy for the common good, something I mentioned earlier, the sustainability reporting, actually on the 12th of March. In 2 weeks, we will have a webinar like this, a free introduction session for the common good balance sheet. So if you want to know more about how to measure sustainability more than just the carbon footprint, feel free to register again for that. Just follow us on social media and you will definitely see what's going on. Feel free also, if you like, you can get a certificate for this course. Go back to Eventbrite and check out the tickets. We'll have a little online exam, a little administration fee, and because actually you will have some exam questions, and we will give you some feedback, and we're going to issue a little certificate for this course. And by contributing to our school, you also contribute to planting trees. That's one of our missions. We try to make the island of Gran Canaria a bit greener by our courses, so you also will help us doing that a little bit. Feel free also to invite or to register yourself to the expert course. And if you liked it today, then please spread the word, give us a review if you like it. If you didn't like it, also be honest and leave us a review too. But I sincerely hope that you enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it a lot, especially the polling in the meantime and Fernando winning the race. That was really cool to see. And yeah, I hope to do that again with you. And all to say is thank you, and yeah, hope to see you another time. I don't know why it's not switching to the next slide. See? There you go. Thank you very much for your attention, participation, and interest. Thank you for your feedback. I see you enjoyed it. So I hope to see you guys too again. Yeah, stay updated with what we're doing, and you will have more webinars coming up. And yeah, feel free also to connect with me on LinkedIn. You will find me there. So yeah, hope to see you again, and enjoy your evening.